Story 1. I followed an angel of death and reader diary. A couple of months ago, I found a diary written by a young girl, Florence Blackwell, who was a patient at the Kings Park Psychiatric Hospital on Long Island. Without telling the entirety of the story over again, there was one person who was instrumental in Florence's survival of any treatment at the hospital, a nurse named Mary. After doing some digging, Mary Baker seemed to be who Florence was talking about in her diary. And while that is a semi-common name, I was able to do a little bit of digging into the local genealogies, and in working with local historians, it looks like Mary Baker was age 20 in 1918 when Florence was first admitted to Kings Park, SH. He was fresh out of nursing school and still at an age where she should have been naive and optimistic about the world ahead of her. Mary Baker, however, at the age of 20, began killing juvenile patients at the Kings Park Psychiatric Center. As an angel of death, according to online sites and sources, an angel of death is a caregiver who abuses their power in such a way as to kill those they were charged with looking over. In the past few years, there have been a couple of cases in the news where nurses would assist in euthanizing elderly or terminally ill patients over and over again. If a nurse or doctor helped in the death of a patient more than once, they're officially classified as a serial killer in the eyes of the law, and due to their angelic profession, normally dedicated to saving lives, they're dubbed an angel of death, keeping the angelic moniker, but exposing them to what they really were doing. 20-year-old Mary Baker would steal away in the middle of the night and kill child patients of the psychiatric hospital who were next on the list for an experimental lobotomy. At this time, the pioneer of the modern lobotomy, Dr. Walter Freeman, was still in medical school and therefore not even medically cleared to be performing these operations. The children recognized the pattern of Mary's visits and knew every night to expect her presence in her ghostly white nurse's uniform, sneaking among them looking for her next victim. Mary ultimately stole away into the night with Florence in tow. They were going to make a life for themselves elsewhere. Thanks to the internet, the story of Florence and Mary was able to spread farther than I had even imagined. I'm thankful that thousands of people were able to read and learn about Florence's life in the hospital, because if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. Since the story spread so quickly, I received a message from another user named Allie. I won't expose any of her personal information other than that Allie actually didn't live too far from me in a county of New York, just north of New York City. She said that she had read and sympathized with Florence's story and was talking to a group of friends and family members when her grandmother stopped and her face went ghostly white. She asked Allie to clarify those dates and that hospital at least 3 times, and on the 3rd time, after asking if her grandmother was okay, her grandmother, Adrienne, told the following story. I've copied and pasted this exactly as Allie had transcribed the conversation for me. My mother had a younger brother growing up, and he was always so bright, she said. She sighed that he could solve any math problem in just a couple of seconds. He did well in school and was so smart, but he was a little slow. I don't know if it was autism or what they'd call it these days, but all my mom told me was that he was slow, and that was Feeney. We knew the gist of what she was getting at. But one day her brother Joseph just up and stopped talking. No one could get him to speak a word, and after months of trying to get Joseph to speak to them and to go about his life, they gave up and put him into a mental hospital because, that's what they did back then. They were living in Brooklyn at the time, running the restaurant, and he was put into Kings Park Hospital, the one from that story. Now I don't know what time that was. I was Burrow, and in God, the mid-40s. So I'm thinking this is probably right. Around that same time, it was probably the early 20s that all of this took place. Allie was stunned into silence, and for good reason. She sent me all of this over text message once we finally realized we had to be speaking somewhere other than online forums, and she actually invited me to meet her and her grandmother up in their town. He said that there was a story from her grandma that I needed to hear ... So I shared my location with my family and all my friends, and I geared up the car to head to upstate New York to meet with Allie and her grandma. The location where Allie had me meet her and her grandma was quaint, albeit little interesting. It was a small town right by the Hudson River, and it was adorable. Cute little homes all on a main street, and they were even having a farmer's market the day we decided to meet. But right outside of the heart of this town was a little park named De Salesian Park. I got closer to my destination and noticed that it definitely was a town park, but in certain sections of the park there were bricks and other posts that looked like from a building. There were mounds of unusually high dirt that just didn't seem to fit in with the park at all, but I figured maybe it was just a quaint feature of this town. I eventually met up with Allie and her grandma, and we sat on a bench facing those mounds of dirt and exposed structural columns. I was the first one to break from the awkward pleasantries, and I asked what exactly this park was. Allie looked to her grandma, and her grandma, Adrienne, nodded and said, "I'll tell her, don't worry." She took a deep breath and started. "So you probably can. How this is called Salesian Park, right? You put it into your GPS on your phone to get here. So what you probably didn't know is that up until about 3 years ago, this actually was a giant abandoned building sitting smack dab in the middle of town. Everyone saw it. Everyone passed by it on their way to work, and yet no one really did anything about it. It was just kind of there, as if invisible. Now I don't know all the history here, but I do know that I had an uncle, my mother's older brother, Anthony, who went to school here. It was probably the mid-20s or early 30s, and Anthony got sent up here out of the city to go to school. He was always a bit of a troublemaker, so they put him into a Catholic school, one of those schools you sleep away at, and where the goal is to make you a priest one day. Now, my mom and her brother passed away right when Allie was a baby, so that was probably... How old are you again? Oh, 19 years ago. Uncle Anthony passed away first and gave us something special to my mom. When she passed away, she gave it to me. I read through it once, but it never really meant anything to me, so I tucked it away in a drawer as something to look at when I missed. My mom, after Allie told me about your story and those people, something hit me as familiar. I pulled out the journal from my sock drawer And I think your Mary worked at the Salesian school with my brother. I was speechless if what Adrienne was saying was correct. This would be a couple of years after Mary and Florence had left Kings Park in the middle of the night. This would be absolutely the correct timeline for their escape. It would make sense that they hadn't gone far. They were a single woman and a young girl in the early 20s, and they wouldn't have gotten far without getting puzzled looks. I think you should borrow this for your research, Adrienne followed up. She had tears in her eyes, and I had goosebumps on my skin when she said her last sentence before excusing herself to the car. This story deserves to be told. I exchanged some pleasantries with Ellie once her grandma left, but I ran back to my car cradling the journal like a baby. This couldn't be real. Had Mary actually written and kept a journal of her life outside of Kings Park? I told myself I was going to wait until I got home to read it, but I had a 4-hour drive ahead of me without factoring in NYC traffic. So I sat right there in my car in the shadows of the abandoned Salesian school and began reading. I'll post and update the other entries as I read them later on August 31st, 1925. Florence and I got incredibly lucky securing this job at this new school. I'm told this was a private residence before turning into the school as it is now, but that hasn't much mattered to me. Florence and I aren't allowed most places, as their spaces reserved only for men or men within the Catholic Church. But that doesn't much matter to me either. What matters is that Florence and I are safe, and we've made it this far in our journey. My last journal I've left behind as a memento of our time there, and I plan to do the same thing here. If I don't take them with us, and I leave no hint of where we're going, we're untraceable. I am now the cook for the boys and teachers of the Salesian school here. Florence, masquerading as my daughter, was allowed to board with me in the basement of the school, as long as she agrees to attend Mass regularly. If that was the only stipulation to our safe harbor, Florence would go to Mass 3 times a day, if needed. She whines and cries almost every night for her mama, and I have to constantly remind her that I am her mama now. There won't be anyone else, not now, not ever. September 3rd, 1925. Florence came running and crying into my arms today. Wow. I was fixing lunch for the boys, my friend James. She cried, he's gone. They found him in his bed, his morning, and his neck was turned all the way around. The priests say it has to be the devil coming to punish him, but James was the best boy I had ever met. He even said we might get married once he graduated from this shoe. I pet her head softly and let her cry into my dress, much as she had the first day I met her. I stroked her auburn ringlets and tilted her head up so that her blue eyes met mine directly. Why, I told her that God and the devil work in mysterious ways, and we mustn't question what the priests are saying is true. We owe the priests our lives, and we do what they say. She sniffled, but nodded her head, and with permission excused herself to the bedroom to almost undoubtedly continue her tears. I have to keep working with that girl. She has to understand I am her caretaker. I am the only one looking out for her. No one will get in the way of me and my Florence. Story 2. My sister loves minions. My sister loves minions. The yellow, banana-eating, overall-wearing, big-eyed things fro. A family movie called Despicable Me. Yep, that's the kind of things you see middle-aged women post memes on Facebook. My sister is obsessed. She eats bananas daily. Watch as the movies, probably has every plush minion made. I never paid any mind. I mean, they are kind of cute. I liked that you couldn't understand their gibberish, but at the same time you could piece it together. She's dressed up as one the past several years for Halloween and, of course, wears their swag all year. So I figured I could maybe save some hard-earned money from my part-time job and get tickets to Universal Studios. That would be the perfect birthday present for her. You only turned 10 once. She cried her eyes out and gave me a huge hug. You were the best brother ever. I sure felt like it. She was excited on the ride up. She was singing along to the radio and ready to have fun. We made sure to get to the parks early so we could enjoy the day all day. She was the first person in line to meet the minions. I took her pictures, and she was so happy she was crying and clinging on to the characters. Then things just seemed off. Universal is a huge park with other great things offered. So, naturally, I wanted to see Harry Potter World and other things. I motioned for her to follow me to the ride nearby. She was so happy her face glowed. Boo. I told her it was time we found other rides and characters, but it's like she wasn't listening. Instead, she was walking back to the line to meet the minions. Harper, come on. I begged her, fuck off. She screamed in reply. I stood stunned for a moment in disbelief. What did you just say? I want to meet Kevin. Fuck off, Harper. You can say that. Fine. Leave me here and go see your Harry Potter stuff. I'll be here when you get back. That wasn't like her. She is sweet and kind. I had never heard her cuss before, and we never used profanity within earshot of her. I gave in, as stupid as that was. I mean, it was her birthday present from me. But I was sure gonna tell Mom and Dad later. Eventually, she gave in and let me see a few things, but she kept staring at her pictures with the yellow mascots. Even when we were eating, she kept talking about it. We were around those things for hours, probably. Even when it was time to go home, she a big temper tantrum. She didn't want to see the night shows or anything. She had spent all her birthday money on Minions merchandise. The car ride home was worse. She wouldn't even talk to me. She gifted me with the silent treatment and acted as if I had done her wrong. It really upset me, considering I had spent several $100s on her gift, which took considerable effort to save up. I made the mistake of telling my parents about her potty mouth. They decided to ground her, a fitting punishment of no television for 2 weeks, which meant no Minions or Despicable Me. I figured I needed to calm down, so I went to a friend's house for the night for conversations and beer. I never expected to see a crime scene investigation. When I came home around lunch the next day, I wish the officer would have caught me before I sprinted. And the house had rotting banana peels in it. And my parents lay on the floor. They were there for hours. Their skin was painted yellow, their heads were shaved and eyeballs were missing and replaced with plush minion eyes. Stab wounds covered them. The officer told me they came in and she was watching Despicable Me. she tried to come after them but was restrained. Neighbors surrounded the house as my little sister was screaming bloody murder from the back of an ambulance. Yellow paint covered her hands and face as they stained the back windows of the vehicle. All I wanted to do was let my sister have a good time. A detective called me about an hour ago and said the ambulance veered off the highway and crashed, and at the EMTs aboard were all dead, and Harper's body never was recovered. She escaped. This is all my fault. Story 3. The Statues. I never liked going to my Aunt Paola's house. Honestly, I never lick Ed her either. She's a creepy Bible-thumping Jesus fanatic, and she'd always circle over me like a vulture. But none of that creeped me out like her house did. It was old, run down, and filled with weird religious art. Sure, there were the typical paintings of the Last Supper and Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's not what made my skin crawl. It was the statues. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what bothered me, but something wasn't right about them. They were littered all over the place, filling every corner, turning up in every direction you looked. And I swear they looked back, giant god-off UL figures of saints and angels clogging the tiny house and turning it into a claustrophobic maze. I often wondered where my aunt had gotten the money for all the sculptures, in all other regard, as it seemed as though she had taken a holy vow of poverty. Very little money was spent on herself or even her toddler son. My cousin Miguel was just as strange as his mother. They were so alike, and I sometimes forgot Aunt Paula had adopted him. It was the eyes that truly made them resemble one another, a haunted stare accompanied by uncomfortable silence. The first time I babysat Miguel, he never fussed or cried the way normal babies do. It should have been a relief. But the entire time I squirmed as he watched me. My mother insisted there was no medical reason to blame for his disposition. Secretly, I wondered if it came from being cooped up with my aunt, who had never dated or married. After that evening, I passed all the babysitting opportunities onto my younger sister. She didn't seem to mind. It probably would have continued on that way if not for a school project that had my sister occupied at a neighbor's house. Right when my aunt insisted on going to Saturday Mass, there was nothing I could do to get out of it. My mom didn't care about my whining. She just leaned across the kitchen table and said, "Look, Marcos, I'm not asking, I am telling." That was the end of it. An hour later we were in the car, driving to my aunt's house. Gradually clean-swept sidewalks and picket fences gave way to chain link and graffiti. Occasionally we'd pass a coffee house packed with hipsters milling around like poverty tourists on safari. People like my aunt were the wildlife. Just as the sun began to set, we arrived at the house. My mom parked. I stepped out of the car and walked up for wooden stairs to my aunt's front door. As I reached out to ring the doorbell, the front door flung open. "Hola, Marcos," she said in a thick Mexican accent. Her dark eyes stared into mine. She was a small lady with shoulder-length black hair. She wore a white polo shirt and a navy blue skirt that resembled a schoolgirl's uniform. Her wrinkled brown skin reminded me of a dried-up river bed. "Miguel is already asleep in his crib. Make sure you give him his bottle if he starts crying. I made 2 of them already. They're in the refrigerator. And make sure you do not put the TV too loud. Your mom and I will be back in an hour." she pronounced the H in the word hour when she said it. "Okay, TIA, Paula," I responded. She preferred when I called her TIA, Paula, because the word "at" was too American. For her, she was an old-school Mexican lady that didn't believe in speaking English. She had no choice when it came to me because I didn't speak Spanish. That made her angry, and it made me chuckle. Every time I reminded her of that she stopped off towards the car as I waved my mom goodbye. I let out a sigh of disappointment as they drove. Off, here we go, I thought aloud as I closed the door and walked into the pitch-black house. I felt the wall for the light switch and flicked it on. Directly in front of me stood a 5-foot-tall star. Tuesday of the Blessed Virgin. I jumped back and yelped. Maybe it was my imagination, but I thought I saw hate in the eyes of the otherwise serene face of the statue. It was ridiculous. Statues can feel hate or anything at all. It's just plaster, I said under my breath as I warily backed towards the sofa. As I rummaged around the floral pillows for the remote, I recalled that my aunt was too cheap to pay for cable. Maybe the bill would have eaten into her precious statue money. Still, that left 5 channels to choose from. 3 of those channels were network news, followed by Fox and some kind of Spanish public access. The pickings were slim. Luckily, Fox was showing episodes of The X-Files, and I had enough time to grab a snack while the commercials were on. Hearing towards the kitchen, I noticed crucifixes nailed above each doorway. Nope, nothing weird there, I muttered sarcastically. Inside the fridge, I found stacks of Tupperware, the 2 bought, Les for Miguel, and a cookie tin hiding towards the back. There was a 50% chance the tin held sewing supplies, especially since it was sitting on top of a Bible. Clearly, Aunt Paula was losing her mind. A spoon sat next to the Bible, so I used it to pry open the tin. Beans, cold, smelly beans. My consolation prize was a bottle of water, which I grabbed just as I heard the show start in the living room. Hurrying back, I plopped down on the couch. My phone buzzed with a new text message. Apparently, my friends were off hanging out at the mall like normal teenagers, and the girls they were meeting had a friend who thought I was cute. Great, I was officially cursed. Instead of replying, I tossed my phone towards the other end of the couch so I could focus in the adventures of Mulder and Scully. The monster they were investigating was a shape-shifting something or other that was behind a string of murders and several local legends, of course, muled. I had to ask what if the legends are true, while Scully rolled her eyes and scribbled on a clipboard. Halfway through the episode, Scully was conducting an interview with a witness who just happened to be the monster in disguise. Tension was building, and just as it reached its peak, Miguel let out a blood-curdling scream down the hallway. I jumped up and ran down the hall to Miguel's room. His bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open to find pitch darkness. With my body halfway into his room, I blindly fumbled for the light switch. I flicked it on and found Miguel standing up in his crib. Tears rolled down his cheeks and onto his light blue onesie. His pudgy hands clasped the rails of the crib as he rocked his body back and forth. "What's wrong, Miguelito?" I asked, as if expecting a 2-year-old to respond. Quickly, I remembered the bottles in the fridge and ran to grab one. I hustled back to his room and handed a bottle to him. He wouldn't take it and continued crying. I then pressed the nipple of the bottle to his lips, but he refused to drink. Desperate, I looked around his room as if I would find the soul. Yushint is crying laying around somewhere. I jumped back in fright. I don't know how I missed it when I walked into the room, but in front of Miguel's closet stood a life-size concrete gargoyle. It hunched over as if ready to pounce on its prey. Sharp feathered wings sprouted out from its back. Its menacing face was dominated by a nose that protruded like a parrot's beak over thick lips formed into a feral grin. The bald, misshapen head was dwarfed by its muscular body, from which oversized hands and arms hung below its bent knees, although the feet it perched on reeds molded a chicken's talons. The overall effect was ape-like. I'd never seen anything like it, yet it had an indefinable quality that matched the rest of the sculptures in the house. Maybe that was why I didn't run away screaming. While watching the hideous gargoyle, I rubbed my cousin's back to soothe him. Shh, shh, don't cry, Miguelito. He coughed and made himself gag from crying so hard. Through his sobbing and crying, I heard my phone ring. From the living room, I dropped the bottle in Miguel's crib, picked him up, and walked to the living room. Without looking at who was calling, I quickly answered the phone with my one free hand. "Hello," I shouted over Miguel's cries. "Marcos, it's TIA, Paula. Why is Miguel crying? I have no idea. I gave him his bottle and he wouldn't drink it. He doesn't stop crying. Mass ended early and we're on our way home. I told you not to put the TV so loud, Marcos." She shouted, "TIA. Maybe he's crying because of that ugly black statue you put in his room. That thing even scared me. Why would you have something like that in a baby's room?" "What black statue are you talking about, Marcos? I've never put anything like that in his room," she answered. "Then where did it come from?" "It was in front of his closet facing the crib," I shouted. She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered as if someone on my end of the line might overhear her. "Listen to me carefully, Marcos. Get out of the house right now. Take Miguel and leave immediately." "What?" I asked. Her whispers turned to screams. "Marcos, leave now. That statue you saw isn't a statue. Es un demonio." I slowly lowered my phone and attempted to translate her last words. "Es un demonio," I whispered to myself. Prickles and goo. Some bumps shot up my body once I realized what she had said. "Oh, shit." She said it's a demon. I dropped my phone and stumbled. The back of my knees hit the couch. I could hear my mom and Aunt screaming my name from the phone speaker as I stepped forward to move towards the front door. Miguel's bedroom light suddenly turned off. Miguel stopped crying and squeezed my neck with his little cold arms. With his face pressed against mine, we focused our eyes on the black hallway. His bedroom door gently creaked open. I could feel Miguel's heartbeat galloping along with mine. From the darkness of the bedroom hallway, a low-pitched growl echoed into the living room. Miguel began to scream again. As I ran to the front door, all the lights in the house suddenly shut off. Heavy footsteps thudded towards us. Something yanked both of my legs out from under me, and I fell onto my side. My head hit something hard, but through the dizziness and nausea, I held on to Miguel's torso with my boot arm and struggled to my feet. We made maybe 2 or 3 steps towards the door when Miguel was then ripped out of my grasp. The last thing I remember was somebody screaming. It might have been me. I am not sure. When I came to my senses, I was on a stretcher being loaded into an ambulance. A paramedic said I had a broken arm and a serious head contusion. I don't recall rambling about monsters or trying to get up, but when I woke up in the hospital, I was told that I had to be restrained to keep from hurting myself. Doctors and detectives quizzed me on what I could remember. I insisted a monster disguised as a statue had attacked my cousin, and they chalked it up to the blow to my head and told me that my cousin had been taken in the same home invasion that had resulted in my injuries. Someone with a clipboard gently explained to me that I had been watching a TV show about monsters and urban legends before I was attacked. The emotional and neurological trauma caused me to blend fantasy with memories of the crime. But what about the statues? I asked. Clearly, I was still confused. My aunt never had any statues, not of gargoyles or anything else. A nurse came in to put a shot of something in my fore. The last thoughts that drifted through my head were that maybe some urban legends are true, maybe a demon and look like a statue, and maybe that house was crawling within ... story for the man in my bedroom window. For as long as I can remember, there has been a man in my bedroom window. It seems strange to say, I know, but it is true. From the earliest, fuzziest memories I have all the way up to now, he's been there, looking at me. In my first memories of him, he was an indistinct, blurry blob that was only vaguely man-shaped. My young mind didn't think much of it, and hardly put much effort into understanding it. The man had always been there, standing motionlessly aside from a slight swaying motion that could have been a trick of the light. He didn't really do anything, and his presence hardly gave off any sort of threatening vibes. He was simply just a constant, passive presence in my life, much like the sun or moon. I simply accepted the fact that he was just always there. It wasn't until I was 7 years old that I realized his presence wasn't a normal thing. When, for the very first time, he moved, I didn't really notice it at first. As I wandered sleepily into my room that night, I quickly changed into my pajamas and settled into bed as usual. I made a point to not look at the window at all during this process. I was plenty used to the man's constant presence, but the idea of him watching me change still made me a bit uncomfortable. It helped to simply pretend he wasn't there as I got ready for bed. As soon as I was all snuggled up in bed, though, I would turn to face the window to say goodnight, much like how other young children might say goodnight to the moon. It was then that I saw his usually indistinct hand, which suddenly seemed a lot more solid as it pressed firmly into the glass, causing the frame to creak under the pressure. Obviously startled by this, I rushed off to tell my parents. The looks on their faces when I told them that the man in my window moved were confused at first, then noticeably horrified. "Are you shit?" To my room, my mom carrying me along in her arms. When we got there, the man had returned to his usual position, standing motionless outside the window. When I tried to explain to my parents that, despite being back to normal, the man had definitely moved, they gave me a strange sort look. However, a flash of understanding passed across my dad's face, and he leaned in to whisper something into Mom's ear. She nodded in response, and they both sighed in visible relief. I continued to try and frantically explain, but she just gently shushed me as she laid me down back into bed. I still clearly remember what she said to me as she tucked me in that night. "It's okay, honey, you just had a bad dream. There's no man standing in your window." It took a couple of years, a few trips to a psychologist, and more than a few unpleasant encounters with kids at school. However, eventually I learned to not talk about the man in my window. I learned that telling others about it would hardly do me any good, as there wasn't exactly anything I could do to prove that he existed. Nobody, but I could see him, and there was no way of physically interacting with him. He didn't actually exist on the other side of the window. It was more like he was a reflection or some kind of image projected directly onto the window. Left with little else to do, I simply shut up about it. Eventually, after some time, everyone else in my life simply forgot about it, passing the whole thing off as just some odd childhood behavior. I never forgot, though, of course, and I definitely never stopped seeing him. I did some research, of course, to try and figure out what the man in my window was. The best guess I could come up with was that he was a ghost or spirit of some kind, mostly because it was the only option I could find that made much of any sense. However, I couldn't seem to find any information on any other instances of someone experiencing a similar situation. None of the somewhat dubious methods of either communicating with or getting rid of the man had worked either. So I eventually just gave up and went back to ignoring him for the most part. It wasn't like worrying about his completely passive, non-aggressive existence in my life would do any sort of good anyway. Things would go on like this for quite a while. Years passed, and my family moved to a new house and a new state. In my high school years, I had entertained the possibility that the man might disappear or be left behind as a result of our move. But I wasn't particularly disheartened to find him residing within my new bedroom window the first night after our move. Eventually, I moved away for college and into the on-campus dorm. The man followed me there as well. See, college would eventually come to an end, and shortly after, I moved into my current apartment. At this point, I would have been more surprised if the man hadn't followed me there. Over the years, his constant presence would be unchanging. However, there was something about the man that was slowly starting to change over time. I thought it was just my imagination at first. However, it slowly became clear that this wasn't the case. As time went on, the man was steadily becoming more and more clear and distinct. Much like hair growth, it was very slow going but became more obvious over time. I began to be able to make out certain details about his appearance. The length and general shape of his hair, the color of his clothes, things like that. As of late, I have been able to somewhat make out the style of the clothes he is wearing as well, a plaid button-up and a pair of jeans to be specific. Despite this, for the longest time I wasn't able to make out any of his facial features. No matter how clear the rest of him would become, his face would still remain as stubbornly blurry and indistinct as my earlier memories of him. Other than that, though, it seemed like nothing much else changed and that things would simply go on as normal, that is, until last night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of banging. It was a desperate sort of racket, as if whoever was doing it was trying their very best to make as much noise as possible. I thought at first that it was someone at my front door, But I quickly realized that wasn't the case. The sound was much too close for that. Finally, I turned my gaze to the bedroom window and realized that it was him, the man in my window. I recoiled in fear, terrified by his sudden violence. It was the most I'd ever seen the man move, and certainly the most threatening he'd ever seen. It took me a long moment of panicked breaths and adrenaline, but I eventually realized that he wasn't able to get in. Rather, it seemed more like the man wasn't even trying to, as if he was simply trying to get my attention. Having calmed down a bit, I decided to test this theory. I rose from my bed, putting on my glasses as I went, and drew closer to the window. Lo and behold, the man ceased his banging. His body language, however, was still panicked and fearful. I couldn't tell, since I still couldn't see his face, but it almost seemed as if he was trying to yell something to me. However, he seemed incapable of speaking in a way I could hear, and I had no way of attempting to read his obscured lips. This quickly started to change, though the man was clearer than he had even been before. So clear that you could almost convince me that he was just a reflection. He was becoming even clearer by the second, and for the first time ever, I was beginning to be able to see his facial features. It started around the edges, giving me an idea of the general shape of his face. Then it started to draw in closer towards the center of his face. The more it revealed, though, the more familiar the man became. So familiar it was eerie. This familiarity shook me to my very core. I knew the man. It was me, and he was screaming, "Run!" Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I am writing this from the first train out of town that I was able to get tickets for this morning. A part of me thinks that I'm being a bit silly for doing this. However, an even bigger part of me thinks that I'd have to be an idiot to ignore the man's, to ignore my warning. I don't know where I'm headed, as I haven't exactly been given clear instructions on where to go. All I can do at this point is hope that I'm headed away from whatever I should be running from, I suppose. I'll just have to see what the man in the window has to say tonight. Story 5, Ballerina. It is a quiet evening, the kind that fails to hide the occasional creaks and moans of aging floorboards as they shy aft in the indecisive autumn temperatures. She drifts just beyond the realm of reality. Her eyelids twitch left and right in short-lived spasms, interrupting the solitary stillness of her frigid bedroom. Her breaths quicken and her arms tighten, rustling the white satin sheets with a softness magnified by the noiseless void of night. In the strange semi-darkness of a room masked by drawn shades, a stray strand of light strangely reflects off of a broken photo frame on the floor beneath her flip-down light switch. It paints part of her pale young features in a fragmented web of light and shadow, a haunting spotlight from which the dark aura of necrophobia emanates. Her imagination is relentless, and it pushes her body to contort and writhe silently as she suffers in her sleep. She walks the fine line between dreaming and awakening. Only someone with a mind as wild as her own could walk this line with such astonishing ease and balance. In fact, the way she moves is less of a walk and more of a ballet. She hops forwards and backwards, swings from hip to hip, crawls quickly and ever so quietly from tiptoe to tiptoe, She has mastered the art of calling out to eyes and hearts, moving at large from beyond the edge until the wind blows, ripping through the silence and upsetting her precariously delicate balance. She begins to fall when her tiptoe miss the rope her white skirt swirls around, her flailing feet as her skin-tight sleeves pull back on her outreached arms, her hands lonely and cold in the sudden breeze. The dark valley below widens slowly and then overwhelmingly. She is gripped by terror when the mistiness of awakening mysteriously masks her surroundings. The fear grips at her heart to the point that her vision begins to swim in a spiral. Her breath catches in her lungs, spotting her vision like an old man's skin. Her hands are filled with sheets, and her ears are drowned with the sounds of her own choked gasps. She has not seen me yet, but she is already afraid. My presence is a tumor in her panicking brain. I am a dark spot on the unseen horizon, a blemish on the face of dawn. Her vision continues to spin until she begins to retch pitifully. She coughs until her panicking body forces air down her throat, thus forcing her mind to slow down to the point that it can process the acceptance of what she sees. With certainty standing at the edge of her bed, I am close enough to salvage a sweet wisp of her lingering perfume, although she's not yet sure whether I am a breathing being or a shadow devoid of life. The spots in her vision finally fade, leaving her to stare at my horridly vague silhouette. She struggles to pick out the end of my neck from the crest of my head. She cannot tell if the ridge protruding from the left side of my visage is a cruelly hooked nose or a malcontent ear. My body stretches down out of her vision, with a lone protrusion from my right that must be a gruesomely long arm. It is a limb that could suddenly shoot up and twist around her tender neck in a noose of fingers. Although her mind has slowed down enough to fear me, her fear still wrangles it to the point that it fails to form a coherent thought. Her overload of adrenaline only funnels into the tighter clenching of her arms to her sides and the ruthless digging of her fingers into the bed sheets. Of battle between flesh and satin. Her only unfocused plea is that I go away, just for tonight, just until the morning, just long enough for her to comprehend the preemptive end of her existence. But I only grow in size, my arm lengthening to a previously unfathomable point. I am a nightmare, except she knows she is awake. I can see it in her eyes, the question tying courses around her mind in wild circles. Could she reach her arm out to flip the light switch quicker than the speed of my merciless reach? But she would not dare to take her eyes off me for fear that the fraction of a breath it would take would be her last. No, she would never let my lusting limb leave her sight. She would trust her sense of touch to try on its own, but she is afraid that I will pounce like a cat on a mouse at any kind of movement. Her mind swings the limbo of risk-taking, wait or reach, wait or reach, wait or... To her horror, my arm begins to extend like a serpent, my hand revealing itself from behind the bed post edge. My fingers are mismatched and come different sizes. Some are bent in backwards directions, and some are wickedly curved like crude scythes. They seem to multiply like a moving mouthful of teeth as they rapidly approach. She cannot lay and wait any longer. Her arm shoots out, fingers scrambling for the light switch. Her hand has connected with something small and metallic that sets her nerves on fire and sends pain streaking down her arm. She is holding her breath and spots begin to take over her vision once more. She has to scramble for that small plastic switch, but the switch seems to be an expert at evading her empty, blood-slick hand. Although her sight is failing her, she still glimpses my crooked fingers, which now appear to number beyond normalcy and stretch to such a length that enclosing her whole neck would leave extra. She turns her head to the direction of the switch, knowing that it is her last hope. She can see a fuzzy square of white somewhere in the darkness. She swats at it with vengeance and feels the bottom of her hand connect, but she has not succeeded in turning it on. She swears she feels my sharp fingernails scratching the back of her neck as they close around it. She strikes at it a second time, a third. Soft yellow light floods her cozy bedroom apartment. It is a bit past 4:30 in the morning. By the time she regains her bearings, my arm has retracted back to the area behind her bedpost. My face has deflated inwards, becoming the casually placed hood of age, a favorite overcoat I harmlessly hang on her desk, chair like an out-of-season Halloween decoration, asterisk, 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 asterisk. She releases a breath which she cannot remember withholding. She sits in the silence a while before eventually unclenching the bedsheets and relaxing her wound-up body. She slowly swings her feet over the side of her bed and follows them with her legs. She is afraid to toe, see-etch the bitingly frigid tiles, but a handful of ticks and tocks find her tiptoes timidly testing it. She walks as if on a tightrope over a canyon. Even though she is finally in full consciousness, the wilderness of her imagination no longer pervades her perception of reality. She still has not taken her gaze away from her ominous overcoat. She faces it with her heels pressed against the cold linoleum flooring, admiring how her head had transformed it into an angel of death. She reaches up to gingerly adjust the outcropping ridge on the left side of the hood. Then she pulls the right sleeve, and so that it no longer meanders from the center, she finally finds the courage to let the sedentary nonentity out of her eyesight. Her traipse back to her warm bed is cut short when she sees T. Blood gruesomely smeared over her wall like the lipstick of death's kiss. Panic returns. Her whole body tenses and shakes. Her vision breaks back into fragments. Her head rushes with nauseating urgency. No, she decides. Not this time, not again. She takes a deep breath and seats herself on her satin sheets. She looks down at her right hand, still bleeding profusely from a jagged wound she remembers hurting herself during her furious scramble. She stands up and pulls a nail out of the wall, setting it carefully next to the photo in a fragmented frame on the floor. She breathes out a sigh of reflection, pondering her embarrassing folly. Blood drips down her hand, staining the white bedsheets. She stands and grabs a flashlight, planning to attend to it in the bathroom. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. She knows I'm back, somewhere in the shadows. I have a clear view of her from my vantage point in the corner of the shower. Her hand is still dripping with blood as she enters. As she comes to a frozen standstill just past the threshold, it begins to collect in a puddle next to her naked feet. The dark aura has returned an intense fear of death. She knows that it will be all over as soon as she sees me in here. The light switch lingers in the left side of the mirror's alcove. To reach it, She would have to cross halfway through the room, she asks. Stands no chance against her terror. It is quiet enough to hear her breaths as they rapidly quicken. She interrupts them with a painfully nervous swallow, and they return with a new desperation, as if she is trying to fit in as many as she can before her inevitable end. At first, turning her flashlight on seems like a good idea. Then she starts to move it around, each twitch creating more shadows. I am everywhere and I am nowhere. There is no escape. Not now that the flashlight has swung out of control. She stands no chance. She attempts to suppress her frantic panic and holds it as steady as she can, but she still trembles in terror, casting the room in a demonic kind of strobe light. This is when she finally sees me. I emerge from her peripheral vision like a demon crawling out of hell. She whips her head around, but just before my rigid figure clarifies completely, her flashlight runs out of batteries. The room descends into absolute darkness. No chance. I lunge at her with aggressive ferocity. She turns to make a mad dash back to her bedroom, but her footing is lost upon the slick puddle of her own blood. She screams in the ultimate culmination of a life's pathetic end until her head crunches against the tiles. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The assumed cause of death was blood loss. It had been in thick pools on the floor, even though the police only arrived 15 minutes following the report of a scream. They simply suspected it to be an unfortunate accident, until the mortician noticed a strange handmark stretching all the W.A. around her neck, a handmark with supernaturally long, numerous misshapen fingers and dagger-sharp nails. The case was never solved. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Next time you wake up in the middle of the night, when it is so silent that all you can hear is the sound of your own breathing, or maybe even now, if you are up late in your mostly dark bedroom, do not look in your closet, and if you do, you will set your eyes upon something. Maybe an overcoat, maybe a shirt, maybe a random piece of junk. But it will not look like itself. It will look like me. And I will be watching you, a deadly hand slowly advancing towards your vulnerable throat. Story 6, Autopilot. Have you ever forgotten your phone? When did you realize you'd forgotten it? I'm guessing you didn't just SMACK your forehead and exclaim damn apropos of nothing. The realization probably didn't dawn on you spontaneously. More likely you reached for your phone, pawing open your pocket or handbag, and were momentarily confused by it not being there. Then you did a mental rest-up of the morning's events. Shit. In my case, my phone's alarm woke me up as normal, but I realized the battery was lower, and I expected it was a new phone, and it had this annoying habit of leaving applications running that drain the battery overnight. So I put it on to charge while I showered instead of into my bag like normal. It was a momentary slip from the routine, but that was all it took. Once in the shower, my brain got back into the routine it follows every morning, and that was it. Forgotten. This wasn't just me being clumsy, as I later researched. This is a recognized brain function. Your brain doesn't just work on one level, it works on many. Like when you're walking somewhere, you think about your destination and avoiding hazards, but you don't need to think about keeping your legs moving properly. If you did, the entire world would turn into one massive hiller. IOU's QWOP cosplay I wasn't thinking about regulating my breathing. I was thinking whether I should grab a coffee on the drive to work. I did. I wasn't thinking about moving my breakfast through my intestines. I was wondering whether I'd finish on time to pick up my daughter Emily from nursery after work or get stuck with another late fee. This is the thing. There's a level of your brain. The T just deals with routine so that the rest of the brain can think about other things. Think about it. Think about your last commute. What do you actually remember? Little, if anything, probably most common. Journeys blur into one, and recalling any one in particular is scientifically proven to be difficult. Do something often enough and it becomes routine. Keep doing it and it stops being processed by the thinking bit of the brain and gets relegated to a part of the brain dedicated to dealing with routine. Your brain keeps doing it without you thinking about it. Soon you think about your out to work as much as you do keeping your legs moving when you walk, as in not at all. Most people call it autopilot, but there's danger there. If you have a break in your routine, your ability to remember and account for the break is only as good as your ability to stop your brain going into routine mode. My ability to remember my phone being on the counter is only as reliable as my ability to stop my brain entering morning routine mode, which would dictate that my phone is actually in my bag. But I didn't stop my brain entering routine mode. I got in the shower as normal routine started, exception forgotten, autopilot engaged. My brain was back in the routine. I showered. I shaved. The radio forecast amazing weather. I gave Emily her breakfast and loaded her into the car. She was so adorable that morning. She complained about the bad sun in the morning blinding her, saying it stopped her having a little sleep on the way to nursery. Andy laughed. That was the routine. It didn't matter that my phone was on the counter charging silently. My brain was in the routine, and in the routine my phone was in my bag. This is why I forgot my phone. Not clumsiness, not negligence, nothing more. My brain entering routine mode and overriding the exception. Autopilot engaged. I left for work. It's a swelteringly hot day already. The bad sun had been burning since before my traitorously absent phone woke me. The steering wheel was burning hot to the touch when I sat down. I think I heard Emily shift over behind my driver's seat to get out of the glare, but I got to work, submitted the report, attended the morning meeting. It's not until I took a quick coffee break and reached for my phone that the illusion shattered. I did a mental RESTP. I remembered the dying battery. I remembered putting it on to charge. I remembered leaving it there. My phone was on the counter. Autopilot disengage. Again, therein lies the danger. Until you have that moment, the moment you reach for your phone and shatter the illusion, that part of the brain is still in routine mode. It has no reason to question the facts of the routine. That's why it's a routine. Attrition of repetition. It's not as if anyone could say, "Why didn't you remember your phone? Didn't it occur to you? How could you forget? You must be negligent." This is to miss the point. My brain was telling me the routine was completed as normal, despite the fact that it wasn't. It wasn't that I forgot my phone. According to my brain, according to the routine, my phone was in my bag. Why would I think to question it? Why would I check? Why would I suddenly remember, out of nowhere, that my phone was on the counter. My brain was wired into the routine, and the routine was that my phone was in my bag. The day continued to bake. The morning haze gave way to the relentless fever heat of the afternoon tarmac bubble. The direct beams of heat threatened to crack the pavement. People swapped coffees for iced smoothies, jackets discarded, sleeves rolled up, ties loosened, brows mopped. The parks slowly filled with sunbathers and DBBQs. Window frames threatened to warp. The thermometer continued to swell. Thank fuck the offices were air-conditioned. But as ever, the furnace of the day gave way to a cooler evening. Gee, another day, another dollar. Still cursing myself for forgetting my phone, I drove home. The day's heat had baked the inside of the car, releasing a horrible smell from somewhere. When I arrived on the driveway, the stones crunching comfortingly under my tires, my wife greeted me at the door. "Where's Emily?" Fuck. As if the phone wasn't bad enough after very thing. I'd left Emily at the fucking nursery after all. I immediately sped back to the nursery. I got to the door and started practicing my excuses, wondering vainly if I could charm my way out of a late fee. I saw a sea of paper stuck to the door due to vandalism overnight. Please use side door today only overnight. What? The door was fine this morning. I froze. My niece shook. Vandals. A change in the row. Uton. My phone was on the counter. I hadn't been here this morning. My phone was on the counter. I'd driven past because I was drinking my coffee. I'd not dropped off Emily. My phone was on the counter. She'd moved her seat. I hadn't seen her in the mirror. My phone was on the counter. She'd fallen asleep out of the bad sun. She didn't speak when I drove past her nursery. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine, and I'd forgotten to drop her off. My phone was on the counter. 9-hole RS, that car, that baking sun. No air, no water, no power, no help. That heat, a steering wheel too hot to touch. That smell. I walked to the car door, numb, shock. I opened the door. My phone was on counter and my daughter was dead. Autopilot disengage. Story 7. A walk home on Halloween. I had just moved to my current flat in Rains Park, southwest London, and was still fairly unfamiliar with the area. Now my current bosses and supervisors know that I am still fighting a losing battle with the underwhelming reliability of Southwest trains, and as a result have less than reliable timekeeping when it comes to arriving to work on time, a battle I had hoped to circumvent with the purchase of a bicycle. Sadly, though, all too often the London weather and my inherent idleness jointly conspired to once again force me to take the trains to and from work. While some people are more than aware that the trains keep me from arriving at work on time, not many of you are aware of the troubles I have returning home. That is to say, I have many a time found myself stuck at Clapham Junction with no train to take me back to Rains Park. In these circumstances, I have to take a bus to Wimbledon Common and walk the remaining 3 miles on foot. It is actually quite a pleasant walk. London doesn't have many hills. If I walk along the ridgeway, you can actually occasionally catch a nice view. True, it is of Croydon, but a nice view nonetheless. Now, to call Wimbledon Village a privileged area would be an understatement. The driveways are home to sports cars and luxury utility vehicles. So you can imagine I have very uneventful walks home. I rarely see anyone on the trip about from the odd older couple, perhaps walking home after a late dinner party, or even a person walking their dog. The neighborhood is quiet, and it gets to bed early, And that night was just like the others initially. I had gotten off the bus at the War Memorial, walked through the village center, and turned onto the Ridgeway. My phone's batteries had died somewhere between Wandsworth and Southfields, so I had to do the walk without music, and this always made the walk seem longer. My usual practice was to walk along and look at the houses, try and guess what the people that lived in the houses would be like. Fast car, business types, SUV, and toys still in the front yard, larger family, that kind of thing. I was playing my game and decided to have a cigarette, so I stopped. I was searching for my lighter and looking around when I noticed that I was not the only one on the street. Now, this was unusual, but hardly alarming. What was strange, however, was that the person wasn't the sort I had grown used to seeing. It was a young lady. She appeared to be drunk or tired, perhaps. I light my cigarette and pause for a second, just a quick second, to judge if she would be capable of making it home by herself, or perhaps maybe she would need me to see if I could call someone for her. It was at this point I realized that she was crying. I started to walk over to her to make sure she was all right. She stopped walking immediately, frozen. I noticed she was in some sort of Halloween costume, a schoolgirl in fact, and as I got closer I began to realize that she was in fact around the age of 15 to 16. She was deathly white. Her makeup must have been professionally done, or she had spent an incredibly long time preparing it. I began to decide that perhaps her friends had made fun of her costume, and she had run off from whatever party she had been at, drunk and upset. I began to start feeling a bit unnerved when I noticed that she was staring directly at me as I approached. I can assure you that in a city the size of London, we have an unspoken rule of avoiding eye contact with strangers at all costs. It was at this point I assumed she was under the influence of something other than alcohol, and I decided to be a bit more cautious. I stopped about 4 or 5 feet away and spoke to her. "Are you okay? You seem a little upset. Are you in any sort of trouble?" Nothing from her apart from that stare. "Have you had a little too much to drink? Maybe some smoke?" "Yeah, right. I know hallucinogens when I see them." "Still nothing. Do you need a taxi home? Do you remember where you live?" At this, the girl began to cry again, but this time she was absolutely wailing. I could feel her raw sense of despair. I actually flinched at the sound. It was positively unbearable. He was dancing on the border of hysterics, perhaps even putting one foot along the line to see what would happen. I was stunned. I wanted to console her and run in equal measures. Washington intended to comfort her and chastise at the same time. All I managed was a meek, "Why are you crying?" She must have heard me somehow, because she began to draw herself back from the edge of what can only be described as a complete breakdown. She was still heaving and sobbing, but once again she brought her eyes up to mine and said very softly, "Because you're going to die. Now, I have been unfortunate enough to witness death first hand on more than one occasion, Suffice it to say, these events had always left me with a lot to think about, and I, in fact, had come to terms with my own mortality quite early in life. It struck me that perhaps, like too many of us had, this young lady had someone quite close to her die recently. Perhaps she was going through the same dark realizations that follow being in the company of death, the same thoughts that can keep children up at night and the pews full at churches. I wanted to let her know that everything would be fine and that death was simply a part of life. All I managed, however, was a slightly incredulous "I know." At this, she seemed slightly taken back, almost angry. She responded, "You are going to die, and he is going to kill you." Alarms went off in my head. I began to feel more than a little threatened. I decided right there and then that talking this girl down from whatever bad high she was on was no longer my responsibility. Had not the venerable Hunter S. Thompson himself warned us of the dangers of underestimating the ability of a drug to take control of a person? "Good luck," I said, and with that, turned and began to walk away. After about 5 steps, I quickly looked back to see her still standing there. She put her head down and began to audibly sob again. I quickened my pace and shortly had walked along a natural bend in the road, leaving her out of sight. I had been left agitated. I remember putting my headphones back in my ears and trying to listen to music from my phone, only to remember it was out of power still. I was still 2 miles away from home, but at the pace I was walking, I was confident I could see over the ground in less than 20 minutes. No less than 2 minutes later was when I first heard the shouting. It was a man's voice, and layered within it was an excruciating sense of malice and rage. "I am coming for you," the man screamed. I couldn't quite place where the voice had come from, but it seemed as though he was at some distance behind me, on the same road, possibly from where the girl had been. I immediately realized that I was to be the victim of some sort of Halloween prank. I didn't, however, slow down. I imagined that this was the point and I was supposed to get scared and began to run, and I was determined not to play along. Again the man yelled, yet this time it seemed to come from significantly closer. "I hate why." "Oh," he bellowed. Now the voice had seemed to have come from somewhere quite close behind me. That is to say, at that volume, I would have expected to have seen the man addressing me, but I was still very much alone on the street. I was also walking quite fast, so the person yelling at me must have run quite fast. Yet I had not heard any other footsteps. There was obviously more than one prankster, and they had hidden along points on the street. I quickly decided to be rather a poor sport and cut off the main road down Thornton Road at the Swan Pub. I hate to admit that their practical joke had gotten the better of me, and I did not want to see what they had in store for me next. I had made it to the front of the second house on the street when that terrible voice shouted at me. Again, "You are going to die." This time the voice seemed to have come from the entrance of the street less than 30 yards away. Perhaps one last chance at scaring me before I disappeared into the darker eyed streets. Since these streets were darker, I decided that I would lose no pride in starting to jog down the hill. I knew it was all probably fun and games, but the ferocity of the shouting, she left me worried that I could, in fact, be dealing with a real maniac. True, it would have been interesting to be a part of the most elaborate mugging I had ever heard of, But that voice just left me with the impression of true hatred. I didn't want to meet the person, or people rather, that could mimic and channel such malignant feelings at will. I had made it to the sea, where Thornton Road becomes King Avenue, when all of a sudden I heard someone screaming, "I will kill you," they shouted. This time the voice, the same voice that yelled, seemed to be directly to my right. He must have been hidden behind the fence of some house, or perhaps even hidden within the house. I had obviously walked right into their trap. I broke into a sprint at this point. Pride be damned. I began to run quite fast, and then faster straight downhill. At this point I was actually beginning to panic. My mind was playing terrible tricks on me. It seemed as though the voice was all around me, constantly yelling, constantly screaming. Up ahead was the main road, Whirple Road to be precise, and it was well lit and busy. I could hail a cab and be home in minutes. But the voices, the immensity of their rage was inescapable. "I hate you," they screeched, "you coward. Die, die, die." Every second, all around me, the adrenaline must have been heightening my every sense. I admit I was scared, and it seemed as though, for some reason, that terrible voice was booming off every surface on the street. It felt as though I was simultaneously running away and into that had rage. The words fell like gusts of a terrible, hot wind pushing its venomous anger at me. I couldn't take it any more. The voice seemed to make me share that same intense anger. I thought to myself, am I the one shouting? And I felt like a victim. I wanted to kill the people that were playing this mad trick on me. I felt the hatred. "Time to die, coward," they scream. "Ed, I hate you." I decided I had to give up. In one quick moment, I decided I would stop running as fast as I could and have a cigarette and wait for these people to show themselves. Come what may, I needed answers and a smoke. I quickly stopped my run and spun around. The car beeped as it raced past exactly where I would have run to had I not stopped that exact moment. I felt its air pocket ruffle the back of my hair as it sped past. In my blind panic, I had run past the sidewalk of the main road and onto the actual road. I had avoided running blindly into the road and being run down by inches. I looked up the road I had come from. Darkness, silence. Whoever had been up there was now gone. I light my cigarette and took a few moments to calm down. Smoking had saved my life that day, friends. I went home after that. Nothing more happened to me, but as I was standing there trying to calm down, working through the panic and adrenaline, I seemed to remember I felt like I heard a soft whisper, perhaps just my imagination. I thought I heard a girl's voice softly saying, "Not such a coward after all."